I've wanted to cover 1981's Shock Treatment, the all-killer, minimal-filler, sideways sequel to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, for quite a while now. I kinda resent calling it a sideways sequel because, barring Brad and Janet Majors, there's literally no connection to Rocky Horror in any way, shape or form. Richard O'Brien described the film as an equal, but that doesn't quite sit right with me either. Basically, the plan from O'Brien's perspective was that he wanted to be able to make a film series filled with randomness, adventures, and other glamtastic elements, but pop Brad and Janet into those scenarios and see how they reacted. A bit like the Gulliver stories, in which none of them are connected in any way except for the fact that Gulliver is present in them. But I'm getting away from myself before we've even got started here. As Shock Treatment is only one of 3 films Richard O'Brien ever worked on, and this film does have some lax ties to Rocky in the form of the writer, director and casting, I've kind of felt tied to the idea of having to talk about both Rocky and Shock Treatment at around the same time. Luckily for me, those excellent ladies and gents over at the Inside the Nutshell channel got in touch recently to ask whether I'd be interested in talking about Rocky on their channel with them, which, well, naturally I jumped at the chance as they're a really good bunch. You can catch their video on the subject by clicking on the card on screen now, and I highly recommend you do. Head over there and send them some love. In return, they offered to help me out in trying to get to the bottom of this wonderfully bizarre piece of cinema, and I was quite surprised to learn about their connections. You see, it turns out that the guys behind the Inside the Nutshell channel actually have access to a large network of medical professionals and psychiatrists. Being aware that this film largely centres around doctors and nurses, and having come from a mental health background myself, I was a tad sceptical at first. But they put me in touch with a professional who's not only been in the field, and I'm quoting here, long enough to remember the Alamo, but who was also actually present on set during the recording of Shock Treatment, both as their on-set practitioner and as an extra in some scenes. He's graciously offered to lend me some time today to reminisce about his experiences on set and to give a rough idea of what the film's about and his thoughts on rewatching the film some 38 years later. So, without further ado, I graciously introduce the maestro of macabre, the practitioner of peril, the chiropractor of carnage. Take it away, Dr. Spooky.
Dr. Spooky!
Ow! What the hell? What? This today?
Yes!
Oh, all right. Let's get going here. Okay.
Shock Treatment continues the tale of Brad and Janet. They're married and living in Denton, USA, which has been taken over by fast food magnate Folly Flavors. Now, Denton isn't much of a town anymore. It's more of a TV studio for the Denton Television Network. Residents are actors, crew, or members of the audience.
Looks like everyone's getting their 15 minutes of fame here, huh?
Anyway, Brad and Janet, seemingly recovered from that batshit crazy event over at Frankenstein's place, are chosen for Marriage Maze, a game show hosted by this guy, Bert Schnick. Yeah, pronounced just like that. Brad gets to a crossover of sorts with another show, Dentonvale, which is, more or less a banana farm run by 2 well-meaning doctors, Cosmo and Nation. And yeah, they're brother and sister.
Hey, get a room, you two. The game the whole family can play, huh? Who writes this stuff? Put your sister to the test, huh? Oh, that's terrible.
So, with Brad stuck in a cuckoo factory, Janet gets upgraded to a musical superstar by Folly, who, spoiler alert, just happens to be the twin brother of Brad. There's an investigation by a couple of judges for the TV show, Betty and Oliver, and surprise, surprise, things just aren't on the up and up. No, Cosmo and Nation aren't real doctors, and Farley is looking to steal Janet and destroy Brad's life. Brad gets rescued, he and his brother have a sing-off, then Brad and Janet escape with the judges to places unknown, while the rest of Denton commits themselves to the lovely turnip farm known as Dentonvale.
So, aside from that little plot synopsis, I'm not here to talk about directing or acting or any of that other stuff. I mean, that's not why we watch movies. You know that. We only watch movies because of the boobs. Am I right or am I right? Yeah. Anyway, if you want to hear that stuff, stay tuned on the video to listen to my friend TY at TYTD Reviews. He's got all the breakdown. He's really good at that stuff because, he's so much better at that than I am. You don't want to hear me talk about that, Besides, I'm just a little too lazy, a little too drunk, and I've got some patients waiting for me. I'm just too drunk and lazy. Let's leave it at that.
So let's talk about what this film is really about. Reality TV. Now, I know we've seen quite a bit of that in recent years, but remember, this film was done in 1981. There was no reality TV then. Unless, of course, you count on those nature shows, but I'm still convinced most of those were staged. Anyway, let's just look at this thing. It starts off like a game show, but not like Wheel of Fortune or Name That Tune. Who the hell can name a tune in one note anyway? I've always wondered that. That's ridiculous. Anyway, it's more like Big Brother or World's Greatest Asshole. Brad and Janet, their lives are on display. Then when Brad gets locked up and Janet gets groomed to be a singing sensation, Jessica Harper's playing pretty much the same role here as she did in Phantom of the Paradise? Is that just me? Really? Okay. So, after the change in the programs, we moved to an American Idol or intervention, that kind of thing. But the whole thing is, it's all a show. Everyone involved in these shows are actors, except for Brad and Janet. That is exactly what most critics complain about these shows today, that reality is not really reality. It's fake reality, which means it's not reality because they make it, you know what I'm talking about. But the producers manipulate the situations and the personalities on these shows to get a more desired outcome. And these talent shows, well, they're decided by the most call-in votes. Not the best way to judge real talent, in my opinion. So, while the story can be kinda all over the place, if you strip it down to the core, you've got a movie way ahead of its time. Not bad for a movie most people hated when it first came out. Hey, I know I said I wasn't gonna do any of this analysis stuff, but it's just, I did it anyway. So, okay. Alright, so that's it for now.
So, as my co-host mentioned, I was present at the making of this film. But I wasn't an extra, like he mentioned. I was a consultant, thank you very much. Because, little known fact, I got the job by lobotomizing the real Brad and Janet. Hey, Hollywood's a tough business, right?
My first task was advising the TV host on his character. You might notice the similarities. Yeah? Yeah, that's me. No, I mean, that was me. I didn't like the way the actor was doing it, so I quietly replaced him. Oh, yeah, then there was the asylum. Well, here's where we had some problems. Completely inaccurate. Too much singing and not enough surgery. Shock treatment. Yeah, right. You ever see someone go through shock treatment? The way I do it? Yeah, there won't be no singing after I get done with you.
So, at this time, things were a little tense on the set, I mean, my ideas at this point were not good enough for a Hollywood production. So, I decided to just go ahead and quit. But don't worry, little boys and girls, because Dr. Spooky has got a special surprise for you. Because for the first time ever in the world, I have for you the real ending to Shock Treatment. Roll it.
Thank you, Mr. Spooky.
Doctor!
Yeah, right. Anyway, Dr. Spooky is absolutely right with his assessments here. For starters, the soundtrack is positively astounding. It's easily some of Richard O'Brien's best work, and considering this film's relative obscurity, it's positively criminal that it hasn't been heard more. Highlights include the opening overture, Denton USA, Lullaby, Little Black Dress, and the title track, Shock Treatment. There's something for everyone really, and the hit rate is much better than Rocky's, with only one or two tracks that kind of drift more towards the cringe end of the spectrum. See, look what I did to my id. Otherwise it's moody melodic ballads or fast-paced, pounding, good old-fashioned hyper rock and roll at its finest. Seriously, Shock Treatment is one of my all-time favourite original film OSTs ever produced. I happily drive around with some of these tracks blasting out of my radio because they're just that enjoyable. The direction is also frankly brilliant. Once again, Jim Sharman's visionary styles shine through here, and while it does on occasion drift fully into territory, it was the 80s after all, it never quite gets to the point where it becomes overbearing. The opening shot alone, where we take a full unbroken 360-degree pan around the studio, is damn impressive in and of itself. But the musical numbers are directed wonderfully, and Sharman really bounces off the hyper-colourful and ultra-80s set designs. Which, on the subject of set designs, they're amazing as well, with a tremendous sense of scale given that the whole thing was shot in just one medium-sized studio in the UK. But why was it limited to a medium-sized studio in the UK, I hear you ask? Well, it's because, believe it or not, we arrived at Shock Treatment as the result of 3 very heavy revisions of O'Brien's originally intended script. Initially, he wanted to do a direct sequel to Rocky called Rocky Horror Shows His Heels, which would have involved Brad and Janet going to a location frighteningly similar to Las Vegas for their honeymoon along with Dr. Scott. While there, it would be revealed that Frankenfurter and Rocky survived the end of Rocky Horror, and that Janet was pregnant with Frank's baby. Additionally, Brad would slowly begin to develop feelings for Dr. Scott that would be explored throughout the film's runtime, culminating in a climactic and happy ending. This was pretty much universally hated by most people who read it. Tim Curry refused to come back to the role of Frank as he said he was done with the character, and Susan Sarandon wasn't interested in reprising her role without a significant pay rise. Barry Bostwick was also unavailable at the time too. Add to this that Jim Sharman didn't like the idea and it was very quickly nixed. O'Brien went back to the drawing board and a new script was created dubbed The Brad and Janet Show. In what was effectively a precursor to The Truman Show, the film would follow Brad and Janet as they returned home to Denton, USA, only to find that the entire town had been bought by a large corporation who intended to turn the whole town into one big television programme, with Brad, but mainly Janet, as the main focus. In the film we would have seen shops, hospitals, and even Janet's own family all suckered into playing sanitised, ultra-clean versions of themselves to appear more TV-friendly, and by extension get more screen time, and by extension become more famous. However, this idea was once again thwarted when a Screen Actors General strike was called, effectively shutting down production, as they only had the locations booked for a set number of weeks. And that fell pretty much slap bang in the middle of these strikes. Adding to the issues, the actor who played Dr. Scott pulled out after reading what his involvement in this new script would be, and Tim Curry, who had initially signed up to play Farley Flavors, got cold feet on the idea when he realised that he would have to play both Farley and Brad. Finally, with schedules beginning to grow rather tight, one of the production designers suggested rather than shooting the film on location, that they instead filmed it in a studio, given that the film itself was largely based around game shows and the then non-existent genre really of reality TV. Dr. Scott's role was slowly morphed into Barry Humphrey's character of Bert Schnick. Replace all the blind gags with paraplegic gags and the script is pretty much identical. O'Brien liked the idea, and with some last-minute tweaks, we arrived at the Shock Treatment we know and love today. Outside of the songs, the plot itself is great. it's quite a bit more complex than Rocky. On a surface level, it can be enjoyed as some light, fluffy run-around madness. But below that fluffy exterior lies some deep comments on the subject of publicity, the media, fame and relationships. Janet in particular is a case study here on how fame can blind people who aren't ready for it. It's only really almost 40 years later that we're able to really process the messages that shock treatment was putting out back then. But they're more relevant than ever these days. It's easy to dismiss this as more Rocky madness, but it's actually quite a bit deeper than that. What I will say is the dialogue at times can be a tiny bit stiff, but honestly, if anything, this script flows like a river, smooth and effortlessly. While there may be one or two minor pacing issues around the end of the second and start of the third act in my opinion, for the most part this film is pretty breakneck. Casting wise, it's faultless too, with Jessica Harper of Phantom of the Paradise and Suspiria fame and Cliff DeYoung picking up the baton of Brad and Janet fantastically. I honestly prefer Jessica Harper in this role to Susan Sarandon. She plays a part brilliantly and has a great naturalistic performance about herself that's really quite difficult to replicate. It's also nice to hear a lower-pitched female singer, which is quite an oddity in musicals, at least the ones I've seen. Barry Humphries also shines through as Bert Schnick and easily steals any scene he's in. He also for me has the best visual gag in the whole film, which is ironic considering the character is blind. Charles Gray plays a blinder as Judge Oliver Wright, and our returning cast from Rocky are all as good as you can possibly imagine them being. All in all, this film's just bloody good fun. But I can understand why it maybe didn't become the rip-roaring success that it could have potentially been. Apart from the fact that the film was dealing in subjects that wouldn't really become mainstream for about 20 years after this movie's release, it also had to deal with the fact that a lot of people assumed it was basically going to be Rocky Horror 2, and went in with those expectations that simply weren't going to be met. Factor that in with the fact that it's only as of 2017 that this film actually had a home video release that didn't have something dramatically wrong with it. Most, if not all, of the VHS releases of this film had sound sync issues, and the DVD release was prone to frame and scene skipping alongside sync issues, that it's no wonder this film languished in obscurity for decades in the wake of its release. Equally, I think Roger Ebert put it best when he suggested that fans of cult cinema, and Rocky in particular, would reject this film as it was purposefully created and designed with them in mind. To quote, "Cult audiences want to feel that they've seen the genius of something that everybody else hates. They discovered a film, they know it's good. Everyone else thinks it's garbage." And I think he has a point there. Though equally I can also say that with nearly 40 years having passed, it's not only held up remarkably well, but I'd argue it's secured its cult status purely through existing without comment for the last 3 to 4 decades. This is a great and solid little picture. If you haven't seen it and you like strange and surreal cinema, what are you waiting for? This is gold. Arrow Video recently released this on Blu-ray and it looks absolutely stunning. With a raft of extra features, it's probably the most comprehensive release this film will ever receive. Go and grab it. Right now. I'd like to take the time here to thank the Inside the Nutshell team for their generous invitation and for helping me out here. Dr. Spooky, the pleasure was all mine. Oh. Okay. Guess we better just roll credits.
Hey, are those the credits?
Yeah.
This means we're done? So I guess it's time we talk about the appearance fee, huh?
Appearance fee?
Oh, yeah.
Right, well, what can I offer?
Well, cash is good. A drop of something, medicinal might be better.
Ah, say no more.